A single procedural misstep in civil litigation can completely obliterate a multi-million peso claim in mere seconds. Rule 17 governs the lifespan of a complaint, mapping the specific thresholds where a plaintiff's power to withdraw their case begins to degrade. Crossing these thresholds without precision triggers res judicata, a permanent bar that prevents a claim from ever being refiled in any court. Bar examinees are frequently tested on these specific temporal markers, as the rules of court favor the defendant's protection once initial proceedings advance. A forensic dissection of sections 1 through 4 reveals the general rules of voluntary dismissal and the jurisdictional nuances that govern failure to prosecute. Mastery of this rule depends on tracking the state of the pleadings, as the service of an answer fundamentally alters the court's requirements for dismissal. Section 1 grants a plaintiff the absolute right to unilaterally withdraw a case. Under this section, the dismissal is generally without prejudice, allowing the action to be refiled. This right is strictly bound by the BAM threshold. The notice of dismissal must be filed before the service of an answer or a motion for summary judgment. At this stage, the court's role is ministerial. Upon the filing of the notice, the judge issues an order confirming the dismissal without adjudicating the merits of the case. However, this absolute right is subject to the two-dismissal rule, which limits how many times a plaintiff can utilize this specific mechanism. If a plaintiff previously dismissed the same claim in a competent court, a second notice of dismissal operates as an adjudication upon the merits. However, if the first dismissal occurred in a court lacking subject matter jurisdiction, the two-dismissal rule does not apply. Under the Ching versus Chang doctrine, the rule only applies if both dismissals were strictly by notice. If the first dismissal was initiated by a motion and granted by the court, it does not trigger the merit-based adjudication on the second filing. Section 1 provides a window of absolute freedom, but repeated use of the notice mechanism creates a permanent procedural bar. Once the defendant serves an answer or a motion for summary judgment to the complaint, the plaintiff's unilateral power ends. Section 2 governs this phase using the MAC principle. A motion is required, and court approval is mandatory. The court now has the discretion to impose terms and conditions, primarily to ensure that the defendant's existing counterclaims are not unfairly prejudiced by the dismissal. Counterclaims do not automatically survive the dismissal of the main complaint. By default, dismissing the complaint carries the counterclaim with it. To prevent this, the defendant must manifest a preference to resolve the counterclaim within 15 calendar days of the motion, as demonstrated in Blay v. Thanya. The failure to file this manifestation within the 15-day window means the counterclaim can only be prosecuted in a separate action. This judicial oversight is even stricter in class suits, which cannot be dismissed or compromised without the court's explicit approval to protect the interests of the represented parties. Section 2 moves the case from a plaintiff's right to a judicial privilege, shielding defendants who have already participated in the litigation. Section 3 provides for the involuntary dismissal of a case when a plaintiff fails to fulfill their procedural obligations. The court may dismiss the action under 3 triggers: failure to appear, failure to prosecute, or failure to comply with rules. The failure to appear trigger is specific. It applies only if the plaintiff is absent during the presentation of their evidence in chief. This dismissal typically operates as an adjudication on the merits. It results in a dismissal with prejudice, barring the plaintiff from refiling the same claim. In PNB v. Daradar, the court clarified that the concept of provisional dismissal does not apply to civil cases. A dismissal for failure to prosecute is final and bars subsequent actions on the same deed. An exception exists in actions for partition between co-owners, under Quintos v. Peachgrow. Nicholas, a procedural dismissal cannot defeat the substantive right to demand partition, as ownership shares have not been adjudicated. A plaintiff avoids the effects of res judicata only if the judge explicitly specifies in the dismissal order that the action is terminated without prejudice. Section 3 punishes inaction. For a plaintiff, failing to move the case forward is legally equivalent to losing at trial. Section 4 ensures procedural symmetry by applying the rules of dismissal to any claimant within the suit. The same standards governing the plaintiff's complaint apply to counterclaims, cross-claims, and third-party complaints. A voluntary dismissal of these claims by notice must occur before a responsive pleading or a motion for summary judgment is served against them. Procedure varies when a specific type of claim does not require a responsive pleading under the rules. In such cases, the claimant must file the notice of dismissal before the introduction of evidence at the trial or hearing. Rule 17 maintains consistency across all secondary actions, ensuring that the mechanics of withdrawal are identical regardless of the party's title. Rule 17 functions through distinct, carefully guarded operational zones, which are entirely determined by the current stage of the ongoing civil litigation. Section 1 provides for unilateral notice before the adversary engages, limited only by the two-dismissal rule. Section 2 requires a motion and court approval once the defendant serves an answer, necessitating a 15-day manifestation to preserve counterclaims. Independent of these voluntary actions, Section 3 empowers the court to terminate a case with prejudice if the plaintiff fails to prosecute or obey court orders. To resolve any Rule 17 problem, the primary task is to identify the exact moment the opposing party served their answer or motion for summary judgment. This service acts as the procedural tripwire that determines which section of the rule governs the outcome and whether the right to refile still exists. In civil procedure, the ability to withdraw a case is a finite resource, dependent entirely on the timing of the defendant's response.